everyone. Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Buzzword, Movement, or BS panel. My name is Deena McKay, and I'm the creator of a podcast called Black Tech Unplugged, where I interview Blacks who are innovating and working in the tech industry. But today, I'm the woman moderating this conversation. Now, I know diversity and inclusion is a big topic, and this panel could not possibly tackle everything about it within an hour. But what I can tell you is, today, we have a very fruitful conversation that I believe you will enjoy. In today's discussion, myself and two panelists talk about how diversity and inclusion is defined, how companies are approaching diversity and inclusion, and ways they can enhance their strategy, why sharing their diversity numbers is important, and much more. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and if you are moved or this panel impacts you, talk about it using hashtag BTU at South by Southwest. Again, that's hashtag BTU at SXSW. Or you can use the chat function to the right of the video player. Now let's start the conversation.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Buzzword, Movement, or BS panel. My name is Deena McKay, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And today I'm joined by two very special guests, Lisa McGill and Lisa G. So Lisa G, why don't you introduce yourself so everyone knows what you do?
Hi everyone, I am Lisa G. I am a creative technologist. I've been in the technology industry for the past 15 years, building innovative products for major media companies. Currently right now consulting at the New York Times, leading up their technology growth, growing out all their digital products. And I'm also founder of UR Tech, which is a tech media platform that helps you navigate the tech ecosystem and find your niche within the industry.
Great. And Lisa M., let's have your introduction.
Hello, everyone. I am Lisa McGill. I'm co-founder and CEO of Alaria. We are taking the guesswork out of diversity and inclusion, but what that really means to us is that we have developed frameworks for measuring inclusion and specifically focus on helping business leaders understand where they can focus their DEI resources to make employees happier, to drive greater inclusion, greater diversity, and ultimately greater business performance.
Awesome. So today we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and we have a short amount of time, so let's jump right into it. So I want to start off our conversation today by defining diversity and inclusion. So Lisa M., how do you define diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so we have our own kind of custom crafted definitions that we use in our work. And so it's important to contextualize the fact that most of our work in this space has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. But we define diversity as the measure of how an individual's personal characteristics differ from those of the normative majority of the organization. And then we combine that with the definition of inclusion, which is really like an action. It's the act of ensuring that people's experiences within an organization are not impacted negatively as a result of their personal characteristics. So one is looking at how they differ from the normative majority, another is looking at making sure that they aren't treated differently as a result of that.
Okay, and Lisa G., what about you?
Oh, I love that definition.
Thank you.
So I define diversity and inclusion, diversity as a group of individuals that are a makeup of various different backgrounds, whether it is ethnicity, race, social economics, religious belief, and like personal belief and culture. So it is oftentimes tied back to just race, but diversity is a mixture of so many other different things, a measurement of so many other different factors. So I like to include all of that into my definition of diversity. And I got a corny analogy that I always use when people are like, oh, diversity and inclusion. It's like diversity is being asked to the dance, asked to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. Because you can be asked all day long, but are you being asked to actively participate, that is the inclusion part.
And you know what? That is the analogy we're actually going to use for today for the sake of the conversation, is the whole analogy about the dance. But I do want to add another part, the equity part. So the equity part is, are they paying you to be the DJ, or at least paying you to use your playlist, you know? And so with that in mind, I do want to just note that just listening to your definitions of diversity and inclusion, it's crazy that there is not one standard, right? Every company, every place has a different definition of diversity and inclusion. And so I want to start our conversation there. With so many definitions flowing around, do you think that's really helping or hurting the cause when it comes to diversity and inclusion, especially within tech companies?
I think it could be somewhat hurting, just a tad bit, because it all depends on who you have in place in leadership who's explaining to you what the definition is. Because if that person doesn't have the proper definition and this is who you have leading up these initiatives, then you're not going to get a proper result out of your diversity and inclusion efforts. So I think it could possibly hurt a little because there's not a standard definition across, because some people now, especially what I'm seeing in diversity and inclusion, they think, all right, we have women, we're diverse.
Right.
And it's like, no, you need more than just women. that because that was the complaint years ago, if there's not enough women in tech. Okay, now women are present in tech, we're thriving. But when now it comes to that definition of diversity and inclusion, and you go to a company and you say, well, you're not diverse enough, they're like, what are you talking about? We have this amount of women, we're diverse. And it's like, well, no, that's just one thing of diversity.
Right.
Totally. I think it's so important to level set on definitions, yes, but the reality is the definition is one piece of it. It's understanding or getting everyone on the same page on what are we working towards? What are the changes we're actually looking to create? What are the questions we're trying to answer through those definitions and through this work? And I think that's so much more important. The words of a definition or, which analogy you choose to use is less important as long as we're all on the same page about where we're headed with it. And that does sometimes feel like a moving target based on this varying definitions.
And Lisa, I want to just ask a question based on a comment you made of us all being on the same page. As you see companies talking about diversity and inclusion, and then you actually interact with people who are within the company, or you are one of the people that are within the company, do you ever feel like everyone's actually on the same page?
No, I think it's my job to get everyone on the same page, actually. When we're conducting inclusion assessments and coming into organizations, we've actually built in a step of our assessment is a leadership workshop where we're literally coming in to get everyone on the same page, give them the definitions, make sure that they're aligned on the goals. And even though that's not key to the actual assessment, we found that it's so important so that we can actually deliver insights and get them to move on the action items that we suggest. Because if we don't level set on terminology, on goals, on the reasons we're doing this work, nobody's going to commit to the next steps. And so we've actually just, it's not that we've ever come into an organization, they haven't had some of that foundational work done, but it's helpful regardless just to have that conversation and make sure that we are all getting on the same page, whether that's through our definitions or their own work.
And Lisa G, as someone who's a part of an organization, do you feel like people are on the same page?
I think 75% of organizations try. But then sometimes I think where, especially if it's these old legacy companies who aren't necessarily open to change, that's where you run into a problem. Because I also feel like sometimes diversity and inclusion, it's a big thing right now. But if someone was raised a particular way, and let's say they're 75 years old, and this is how long they've been on earth, and this is how they've been raised, it's kind of hard to change a person's perspective of diversity and inclusion if this is, what they're used to, and you're trying to open and change to them. And I think that's and I'll call them out. CES is a prime example. Those are older white males who run that conference, that run that convention. And they're like, what? Diversity and inclusion? We have one woman. It's like, well, one woman isn't enough out of this whole entire conference that you put on. One woman isn't enough. So, and I just feel like when you look at the board of who runs that organization, they're all older white males. So I feel like for people of that statue, it may be a little hard to explain. You got to open your mind a little bit.
Right. And you know what? I actually want to take your comment a step further. So let's say you have someone who has been at the company over 50 years. Now, over that 50-year period, let's just say it was a smaller company and it grew over time. you're usually and probably going to hire someone who looks like you, has the same attitude, has the same thought process. How has that hurt when it comes to diversity and inclusion? Because from my perspective, if we're hiring the same people and then all of a sudden you try to throw in a diverse candidate or someone who is different, it's not really going to work out.
Yeah, it's a system of bias. It's there's a long list of types of bias, right? But like what we're seeing is that in hiring practices is where it's so clear that we need to start creating systems and processes to work around our personal biases, right? We can't actually remove bias, as individuals. We are human, but we need to be aware of them. And I think that even in small startups, it's like if you have two founders and you immediately hire two people, the default and the common practice is you're going to reach into your personal network and hire someone you know. And that creates so many problems down the line because you now have a limited network that you're going to be able to recruit from. And when you're in the mindset of we need to hire fast, we need to hire somebody we trust, we need to, all these things that are priorities from a business perspective, you quickly devalue diversity and, having, a wide range of voices in your product team and all these different things that could actually benefit your company from a long-term strategic perspective if you thought about the value that it has in terms of culture and in terms of voice, in terms of awareness and perspective. And so we're seeing that from, I guess my point is like from small companies all the way up to the large organizations around the world. We have that default behavior and it's based on some intrinsic biases that we have as humans, and then we have to create processes and policies to work around them, and we have to hold the leaders at the top accountable to those policies and processes, regardless of what they think is right.
And Lisa G, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I totally agree. It starts at the top. It definitely does. And I think sometimes with me having my own startup, I probably have fell into that trap as well. But I am thankful that my network is very diverse. So I am quick to hire someone that I immediately may know and network like, oh yeah, this person's a great systems admin. Let me pull them from my network. So that is something that I think most startups do fall into, which I don't necessarily blame them for that. But what I say is this, especially with me, with my startup, all right, I hired you because I know you and I trust you. Okay, so we're growing. Now I'm going to depend on you to hire someone of, go out and find someone. And I'm going to leave that task up to you now because I want diverse in my company. So I will make sure I have said this, like, hey, when you go to hire this person that I need for this, make sure that they're a diverse candidate. I would prefer someone that you may not know, actually go look for the candidate, do a full interview so that we can make sure we're getting well-rounded people here.
Yeah, it's the whole concept of like paying it forward in a sense, right? It's like, yes, I brought you on board. I know you, I know your capabilities, and I also know your skill set. But go find me someone, that's in your network that's still a diverse candidate or maybe a little bit different than us, and bring that to our space.
Yes.
It's so important here to mention that like the idea of someone being different or, bringing diversity to your team does not mean that they're less talented or less qualified. I think there's often an assumption there, and it's completely false.
Yes. And, we're talking about bringing diverse talent to our teams and in our space. And so I have to talk about the thing that is always in the back of our mind and we always hear all the time, the diversity numbers within companies and organizations. Obviously, we've seen, especially from big tech, that the numbers like rarely change. There's like marginal change, if anything. And I just want to talk about how do you all feel about that? And then also, what things can companies do to make sure that they are bringing in talented, diverse candidates?
So from my experience, just lately for like the past 2 years, I've been seeing companies bringing in diverse talent. They're doing the work. They're trying to find the talent. They're going to all types of conferences, recruiting. And some companies I've been asked to personally go and recruit from like my network or from the conferences that I speak at. The problem is retaining them. The companies get them, but then you're not keeping them. So I do still feel like there's some sort of disconnect there of, okay, we're bringing in diverse talent, but they're here and now they're not happy. So what's happening? So I do feel like companies are trying to change the numbers, but they're not keeping the numbers. So by the time these reports are pulled, the numbers look the same. But I can definitely attest to, and I've seen it. They're hiring diverse talent. They're just not keeping them on long enough.
Yes. And I think that this, I have my own personal bias here. I mean, as you all know, I measure inclusion. A big piece of what our work involves is trying to convince companies that it actually is not enough to simply track representation metrics, and that while you need that information, and while, yes, you should be striving to increase those numbers, seeing a percentage increase here and there, increasing, women representation by 1% or Black representation by 2% is not really much to celebrate. And that while that sense of transparency and communicating that to the world is certainly progress, what we're aiming to get companies to do is look at true signals of inclusion. And we need to be looking and paying attention to what are the opportunities that are created for folks once they're in your organization? Are they provided the same levels of access? Do they have the same, levels of respect? And, do they have the ability to, have fair compensation? There are some very basic things, but we talk about inclusion in our framework. It's 9 categories of inclusion that we use to measure inclusion and with organizations and our clients. But all of this to say is that you have to take an intersectional lens and say, when we're looking at our organization, what are we seeing as it relates to promotion rates, as it relates to retention rates, as it relates to the frequency of moments that make individuals feel excluded? And what can we do to change that interaction? Because what matters at the end of the day are these little moments. It's like these little moments day to day that start to add up, to grind, that make people feel as if they either belong or they don't belong. They either are loyal to the company or they don't care about the company. They either are excited by their work or they don't want to work with this team. And that has to do with those interactions. And so it's all about driving behavior change and creating a sense of inclusion, and then monitoring, not only representation metrics, but with an intersectional lens, what is the actual outcomes of that shift in behavior and focus, and I think retention rates and promotion rates are a good place to start.
You know what, we've been talking about inclusion so much. I just want to shift gears and talk about inclusion as a whole. And so the first thing that I want to start with from an inclusion standpoint, and Lisa G, I want you to start with this, is what does a company have to do then to keep you?
That's a tough one, because there are going to be some happy employees. There are going to be some disgruntled employees. So I honestly feel like it is impossible to please everyone. It really is, because I've seen companies bend over backwards to make the changes. Like, okay, the onboarding process, they've improved the onboarding process, because I've started at companies and had no idea they had employee resource groups. And I'm like, well, no one told me this group existed. And they're like, oh yeah. So, I've seen them make changes to like their onboarding process of like, okay, introducing the different employee resource groups, introducing support groups, introducing all of these various things to make people feel included, which I do think is important. But I also feel like, and this is maybe jumping off topic a little bit, when you're going to introduce people to these employee resource groups, the company has to do a job to make sure these employee resource groups are being managed and ran properly.
Because elaborate on that a little bit.
Because I've seen it where, these employee resource groups are supposed to be a safe space. Well, a safe space to, communicate and say or vent how you may be feeling about different things that's going on in the company. Well, if these employees resource groups are necessarily communicating in Slack, anybody can see your Slack channels.
Right.
And there has been instances from, and I'm not talking about in no company in particular, I'm just saying, I know for a fact that there's been instances in companies that, okay, someone may peek into the employee resource group of one particular group and go back and report it. And it's like, well, how did this person even find out? I thought this was supposed to be a safe space. So I think, or there's also toxic people in those employee resource groups too, because sometimes it be your own people. So
sometimes it be your own people.
So, I feel like there has to be some sort of governance on these employees resource groups too, to make sure that they are running smoothly, and that the toxic is like removed or, somehow managed per se. I think that's important because you can introduce employee resource groups all along, but if it's a mean girls club, that's not making me feel good.
Right. And from your perspective, what would you like to see from like a management perspective for the ERGs?
I would like to see more so, it feels like a clique. It feels like, okay, this group is already established. I'm coming in and I have to like more so like introduce myself and like be an extrovert to like fit into this group. And it's like, especially in a tech company, most people need to understand that techies are introverts. We are oftentimes not seen. We like our work to be seen and not necessarily us be seen. So it's really hard sometimes for tech people to be extroverts and, be this social butterfly to try to fit in. So there needs to be some sort of social aspect of, all right, you want to join these employee resource groups. Maybe each person is assigned a sponsor of some sort.
Okay, so like sponsorship or maybe mentorship, something
Yes.
along those lines.
It needs to be something that introduces you, but I also feel like it should be optional too, because not every tech person goes to a job and wants to talk or wants to communicate or want to be friends.
Right.
So it should be optional. It shouldn't be forced. That's what I will say. Because I know I've started at jobs, especially early in my career. Mm-hmm. I was just like, hey, I just want to code. I didn't come here to make friends, and this is when I was fresh out of college. So this is 15 years ago.
I think that 2020 kind of opened up a lot of these conversations for business leaders that they weren't really anticipating. And it's, around this idea that like different people need different things from their employer and work better in different environments, and support relates to everything from how we're managing families through a global health crisis, to how we're shifting to remote work, to how we're creating space for grief, and I think the reality is that we're coming to terms with the fact that business leaders and employers do have a responsibility for taking care of and caring about the health and well-being of their employees, and understanding that, yeah, it looks different for every individual. And the only way you're going to understand how to best support that individual is to having a conversation with them and listening to them. And so I think that that's a really big piece of, I hope what business leaders took away in 2020 is just like paying attention and listening to their employees and understanding that there's uniqueness that comes with that. And then one thing I'll add, based on something you said earlier prior to the ERGs, is this idea of trust and like safe space and being able to share what isn't working for you currently in this organization. We found that that's one of the benefits of like working with organizations like ours, is that we literally collect that information from the employees and we protect the anonymity of the employees through our process. So never would we ever surface something that would be identifiable or something that could be backed into so that it would impact the individual, but rather we're trying to drive the decision-making and the shifts in an organization that need to happen based on what we're seeing. And so that level of, that extra like layer of safety and security and confidentiality is really, really important and impactful.
Do you feel like when there are the ERGs, or even, so I'm going to give an example of, for some of when George Floyd was murdered, there were a lot of comments that were put out by companies. There are a lot of talk around diversity initiatives and helping and making safe spaces for employees. Do you think that safe spaces actually do exist?
I want to say yes.
I'm going to say from a tech perspective, you're on a company's network. Everything can be monitored. And I'm always mindful, and I tell people of that, So
Yeah.
it's safe to a certain extent, but
Exactly. It depends on how you define safety.
Yeah.
And I think that the key there is less like, not that they can never see the information, but rather like, have you created a culture of transparency and openness and trust, and one that's accepting of failure, and one that's like supportive of growth? Because if that culture exists, then getting that feedback or hearing that people aren't happy in certain moments, or giving people the opportunity to express concern, is a positive thing in that environment. And so, the idea of safety is a little bit different there, because we've created safety in having them able to communicate those things, and we're not worried about, are they able to see or hear me?
Can I just, I want to circle back on that too, because what I will say, this is a tough, and I want to make sure I word this properly, out of being safe, because I feel like a lot of companies felt this way with like the murder of George Floyd. So many companies were getting backlash for not saying anything. And this is where I sympathize with the companies too. They did not know what to say, because we live in a cancel culture where one wrong word, consumers will cancel you, and they would start a whole petition on social media, and boom, your company went downhill. No one, I feel like, knew what to say, even publicists, because if your publicist said one wrong word, that's it. So, and I'm not saying that it was okay for companies to be silent. I'm not saying that was okay, but I understood why some of them took so long to make statements, because I just feel like in this day and age of, we're in this age, and I actually don't like it. It's like one wrong word, everyone's ready to cancel you.
Right.
And I feel like, well, that's not fair. So I feel like that's why some companies were hesitant on saying anything, or just in general, when things happen in the world, they are so hesitant on saying anything because they don't know what to say out of fear of saying the wrong thing. Because I'm pretty sure everyone saw on social media all these different companies that was making, like currently right now, companies are getting dragged for making Black History Month posts. And it's like, oh my God, at least they're trying. That's how I'm looking at it. They're trying, but it's just like, it's kind of like a damned if you, damned if you don't.
I think in business, everything is a calculated risk. Communication is complicated regardless of the topic. And we overthink and over strategize around a lot of things. But I do feel strongly that like doing nothing and saying nothing was the absolute wrong decision in that moment. And that, it wasn't, the bar was pretty low. I mean, it's like, did you actually explicitly name racism? Were you able to say that you stand with Black Lives Matter? These are not really big controversial things to say. But we saw a lot of companies stand in a position of like inauthenticity, or unable to truly flag their own progress or a need for progress. And I think that like I guess what I'll just say is that like the bar was pretty low, and that authenticity like shined through. Those that could just genuinely say like, hey, we're working on this. We know we have work to do, but here's what we think right now. Those are the ones that like stood out and allowed, gave themselves some like, grace from their consumers.
I'm going to play devil's advocate. So what you both said was accurate, but I want to put on the flip side of, there were some companies who made these like grandiose promises. We're going to do this, that, and the other. And to date, to be honest, we haven't really seen any change. We haven't even seen or heard an update on their goals. So would you rather hear a company be silent, or would you rather a company have the response of like, having these big goals, but not even hearing any type of update on it, or hearing any more about their diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Those are the companies that I'm like, you should have just stayed silent. You might as well have not even said anything, because we live in this culture where if you say something, people gonna circle back and see where you're at with it. That's just the world we're living in now. So they were just better off not saying nothing.
And honestly, I hope that we do. So I'm like, I stand on the point of like, you made that statement, I'm going to hold you accountable. That's great. And like, shout out to like Cheryl Dorsey from The Plug for like immediately creating a spreadsheet and tracking these people's statements and saying like, okay, let's hold these people accountable. Here's what they said. And like, if you don't subscribe, definitely check out TP Insights and like, look at that stuff. But like, I think that like that level of accountability could be helpful and could be what our society needs to truly drive change from the top.
It's needed, but it's one of those things where it's like, I think the decision makers don't know where to even start, because they're like, hired these publicists, these big time agencies to come up with this statement for them. And they're like, oh my God, how do we go about implementing? They may not know about a company like what you have, which they probably need. And they're like, I don't even know where to start.
That's absolutely right. I mean, they're experts in what they do. They're not experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And that's okay. I think that's where the authenticity comes in. It's like being able to just say like, hey, I see that we have work to do. We're going to figure it out. We don't know exactly what that means yet. And so we did see a lot of that. And so then you see like listening tours or like increase in engagement surveys and things like that, which is like a step in the right direction again. But I still don't think we're there in terms of like the change that needs to come from that, because just because you have data, just because you listen to a few people's opinions doesn't mean you actually did the next step and like interpreted that to say, these are the policy changes, this is the process changes, this is what we need to do internally to truly change how people feel and how they exist within our workspace on a day-to-day basis.
And I want to touch back on data, Lisa, just because you brought it back up. And all these companies are releasing the numbers, and as we know, the numbers don't look that great. What are your thoughts around actually releasing numbers? Is it helpful or is it hurting the movement?
Oh, I think it's absolutely helpful. I think transparency, I'm a very big supporter of transparency. I think we all need to be real about where we're at and about the progress that we need to make, and about working together as industries and as peers on like, what does this mean? How do we make this change together? So I'm all for it being public. I think the limitation there is that it's not enough to just track those numbers and report them once or twice, every year or every 2 years. Like, that's not enough.
Lisa G, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think the numbers should be public or transparent, because it reminds them that they still have work that needs to be done, especially for the companies who are honestly trying and they're seeing like this major shift or influx of diverse candidates coming in. And then they're like, oh, okay, let's pull our numbers. And it's like, oh, crap, the numbers are still low. We still have more work to do.
Yeah. And also with having the numbers, I think it, like you said, it makes things transparent and it makes something tangible, right? If you have a number, you can hold people accountable. And I think that is one thing when we talk about diversity and inclusion, accountability is just not there. Do you, either of you, have an opinion on how we can start holding companies and even like ERGs more accountable for what's going on in regards to the diversity and inclusion space?
Well, I guess I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit on that, because I have honestly consulted and stepped in on a few ERGs for companies, and they'll say, hey, I want to go to the Latinas in Tech conference to recruit, or I want to go to the Blacks in Tech conference to recruit, or whatever it is that's specifically focused on, a particular group of people. And my first thing is, so are you going to check off numbers off the box, or are you going to actually find talent that we need to fill for this particular role? Because, if you're, especially when they're like gun holes on going to this one event that's focused on a particular group of people, it's like, okay, there's 1,000 other events out there. It's more than just this particular group of people. Diverse candidates come from all backgrounds, not necessarily race. So, sometimes I'm always like, all right, it's great to hit the diversity and inclusion numbers, but also we need to find a person that's talented and fit for this particular role itself. Because, all right, you go fill this number to check off this box, but can the person do the job?
I'm actually going to take what you said a step further. When people go to those conferences, how many resumes do they actually come back with that they put into the system and actually even take next steps with? It's depending on where you are, it's rare.
You know, I've seen it from both sides. I've seen it where they didn't call everybody back just to check a box. And that's unfortunate because it's just like, okay, well, who says they're qualified for the job? Right. So, and then I've seen it where it's like, you went to the conference for representation, but are you going to call anybody back? So you mean to tell me out of 150 resumes, nobody fits the job description, not even for a callback, you know, at least? So I've seen it both sides from different companies. Because I think, you know, some companies are such in a rush to fill the diversity and inclusion quota that they're like, yep, okay, they check this box and they have this experience, let's just hire them. And it's like, you can't do that either, because I still feel like the hiring process still needs to be the same for everyone. If you're going to have this person take a test to make sure they're qualified, everyone should take a test, you know.
Certainly the policies and processes should be consistent across the board. That's going to help reduce bias regardless of in which direction. I think, you know, taking a step back and just really quickly a note on like accountability, Deena, from your previous question. I think we have to like circle back to like the idea that we started with, and it's the fact that like we can't hold people accountable until we are all on the same page about what we're working towards. And I think that like within an organization, particularly that's important, is like understanding that we can't move forward as an organization on all possible aspects and dimensions of diversity in the same short period of time. So getting specific about our aspirations, our goals, what we're working towards, what change we're actually trying to create, and getting hyper-focused on like, these are the 3 changes we're really going to focus on for this year. And being aligned on them across the board, across the organization, so that people within the organization, whether they're the C-suite, whether they're HR, whether they're managers, know how they can support those, you know, 2-3 goals for the year is super, super impactful, and then allows you to create systems of accountability because you know what you're working towards. I think that a lot of times what we find is that we'll say, generally speaking, like, oh, our company cares about DEI, you know, but then you ask them what they're doing and they're like, oh, we have ERGs, you know, like that's, you know, we did unconscious bias training. And it's like, but yeah, but what change are you actually trying to create? What goal are you working towards? And they don't know. And so you'll have, you know, C-suite executives that are looking to like prioritize, you know, maybe pay equity or, you know, representation of a certain group. And you'll have HR who's like, oh, we really need to work on the benefits package. And then you start talking to like entry-level employees and they're like, we're just looking for some like career opportunities and some flexibility, right? And so there's this misalignment in what the business leaders think that the organization needs and what the actual employees want and need as well. And so I think just, again, like that accountability can really become possible through communication and alignment of what we're working towards.
You know what, Lisa, you bring up a great point, and it makes me think, so when we have people in organizations with diversity and inclusion, there's a couple different approaches you can take. You can have internal employees run your diversity and inclusion. You can have someone maybe come in from the outside or internally, but have 100% allocation to that role. Or you can use outside companies. What has been successful for some of the organizations? I know every organization is different, but what have you seen successful? And then also, if they are using employees, do you recommend
that? To your point, we've seen it successful in a lot of different ways. Often it depends on the size of the organization, whether or not they're, you know, centrally located or like they're spread across the world. It'll depend on, you know, the different levels of management and reporting and just how they communicate internally as well. So any of these can work, I think, but the reality is a couple of things are necessary in order for it to be successful. One, as I said before, it has to be driven from the top. The executive team cannot picture this as a special project or an HR, you know, thing. It's like, it has to be strategically driven from the top. Everyone has to communicate that this is important, that it's, you know, a part of the mission and values, that it's, you know, going to drive the success of the organization. And it has to be believed and communicated in that way. If we can get that to be the point, then what we see is that, yes, you know, there's this massive increase in folks getting hired into D&I executive roles. That is great. The reality is, though, I think at this point it's maybe like a year and a half old, but Russell Reynolds did a study on D&I leaders in the S&P 500. And so I think it was like 243, if I recall correctly, D&I leaders at that time. And the majority of them had been hired within the last 3 years. So like that's just speaks to the newness of that role. But what they found is that only 34% of those D&I leaders even had the basic employee demographic data that they needed to understand what's happening from a DEI perspective in their organization. So like that's like step one, right? It's like, okay, great, it's from the top, we're hiring somebody, wonderful. Do they have the information and tools that they need to actually do their job? Right. Do they have financial support to invest in the interventions, initiatives, and training that they need to drive change? Because the reality is that most of them still don't. And so, you know, you can have an internal team be very, very successful, but you have to give them the support that they need.
I do want to bring up, and I see it from my friends and just other personal experiences, is when people do let internal employees do DEI, so let's just say diversity and inclusion, so let's say they're already doing their role 100%, and then you're adding that to their plate. I will say I do have a little issue with that because you're basically doing two jobs.
You are. It's not basically.
You signed up for it. So, you know, it's one of those things like, well, I'm not saying you, Deena, but, you know, it's like, well, why did you sign up to do it?
Right. But at the same time, why won't they pay the person that is doing both roles just a little bit more?
Yeah, listen, human capital is any company's biggest expense and biggest asset. And it's 30 times the budget each year in the United States than total advertising spend across the entire state. So like when you start to talk about like what we can do to better value and take care of the humans in our companies, it's like, it's a ridiculous idea that we don't optimize for that and that we don't appreciate or value the people that help us do that. Like I'm with you, Deena. I'm like, pay them. They're doing you a favor. They're going to make employees happier. They're going to reduce churn. They're going to help you recruit better folks. Like, are you kidding me? It is such a, it's a ridiculous idea to just have volunteers on this work.
And they do a lot of work. I will say that because, you know.
And it's emotional work. It's heavy. It's
at some of the companies I've been at, there are events every week. And I'm like, oh my God, like, how do you guys have time to plan all of this and do your job? So I do get it, but it's like, oh, I guess they signed up for it.
Yeah, because people want the change, right? And they don't, you know, there's a thing where it's like, you know, you're like, well, if I want to see this change, I have to be a part of it. I have to participate, right? And it's like, that is a very easy thing to fall into. But the reality is that we need business leaders that appreciate that work.
Exactly. And so we've been talking about inclusion in the workspace. And Lisa M., I do want to circle back because I know you said when you work with organizations, I think you said there were 9 steps that you usually recommend in regards to inclusion. So I want to make sure that we note that.
They're not steps, but we have 9 categories of inclusion, if that's, I believe, what you're referring to. So when we're looking at organizations and we're saying, like, what are the moments where people are made to feel excluded within your organization? And that's typically what we're measuring with. We're trying to understand, you know, not only demographic and representation data and satisfaction data, but like, what are the actual experiences that people are having that make them feel excluded? And we're going to typically organize those into that 9 categories of inclusion. So those are access and participation, skills, use and assignments, learning and growth, compensation and benefits, career opportunities, work-life balance, recognition, respect, and workplace interactions. And so we're typically looking at those 9 types of experiences to understand where we can focus initiatives and interventions and policy changes so that they are quantifiably impactful, like within the organization.
I don't know about you guys, but I think those are like the top 9 things when I'm looking at a job or like looking to stay at a job. Those are like my top 9. If I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would add, but definitely my top 9 for like why I would stay somewhere and what makes me feel good at a company.
Yeah, if any company can speak to the experience they're trying to create in these categories, they've done a lot of work and have thought through some stuff. So I think it's a big, if I can just like hand this to people and just say like, here, you know, like quiz them on this. But yeah, it can be, frameworks are helpful in that way, so.
And so we talked about inclusion, and so I have to ask the question to get your personal opinion. In 2021, if you were going to a new job, would you work for a company that is not diverse? the looks on your faces is enough.
Because it's 2021. Like, it should definitely be a variety of people at your company by now, unless you're saying this is a startup with 3 people. You know, I don't see how, if someone's asking me to come on as a tech founder, a CTO, and it's a startup, literally, with like 3-4 people. But you know one thing, I probably wouldn't even take on that much work, because it's like, I don't want to build anything from the ground up. I'm past that. You're gonna
It's a
have
different story.
It's a different story. You probably don't, if you're that much of a startup, you don't even have the budget to bring me on for that type of work. So if it's an established company and they're not diverse, no, because I probably would not be happy there.
Exactly. Yeah, I would definitely be looking to work for a diverse organization that has clear mission and values and social impact in mind. I don't even think I could work for an organization that doesn't have a positive social mission at this point.
I totally agree. If someone asked me that, I'd say, heck no, because first off, I don't want to go somewhere that when I get in the door, they're automatically like, oh, you're a Black woman? Okay, so help us with our diversity and inclusion stuff. We need so much help. And then that's your new job instead of what you actually signed up for. So for me, that's the first thing I look for is okay, what are you already doing and who's already in there? And if possible, even getting their experience before I get in there, because a lot of things, it's look shiny and then you get in there and you're like, ooh, this is not what I signed up for.
Exactly. We there's this analogy we often provide in our workshops, but I'll try to just shorten it up really quickly so I don't get too long-winded here. But essentially the gist is that when we're looking at how diversity, equity, and inclusion impact an organization, we'll ask business leaders what are the metrics you care about, and whatever it is, it tends to fit into a framework. It's the 4 pillars of business performance, which are recruitment, talent, retention, operational efficiency, and market appeal. Everything fits in these 4. And we basically can map out what happens when you hire a diverse candidate and don't create an inclusive environment. And the reality, the result is that if they leave because they did not have a positive experience, the actual impact across those 4 pillars of performance is actually negative across the board. And so we can map out and show you how by hiring a Black engineer from an HBCU and patting yourself on the back, but not bringing them into an environment where they're truly respected and given the same opportunities, your business takes a hit across the board.
Lisa, I think everyone needs that. If that would save, do you know how much money that would save? A lot of these companies out here, they had that.
It's sad that we have to tell them that they will lose money because of this, right? It's that whole idea of the business case of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the reality is that we have that research, and if I need to pull it out, I will show you.
We've been having a very fruitful conversation, and it is time for our word association game. So with that, obviously for the title of this panel, we have buzzword, movement, or BS. As we know, there are countless terms that we hear about from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. So I'm going to say a word, and then you're going to tell me if you think it is buzzword, movement, or BS. So first word, ally. Culture fit. All right, affinity group or ERG.
If properly supported.
Okay.
Yes. Disclaimer.
Take that. All right, next word, bias. Okay. Now I gotta ask, why movement for both of you?
I think being aware of your biases is key, but it's not enough. But I think it's a step in the right direction.
Okay.
Yeah, it's because biases is real. Is real. It's definitely a movement. And I do think companies and people are trying to change their way of being biased. And I like to tell people this all the time. Everyone has to keep it real and authentic with themselves. I think we all have some form of bias inside. Whether we realize it or not, there's all some form. And now I think there's a conscious movement of trying to change that, especially those who aren't aware.
Right.
Totally. And also bringing that awareness of your personal bias and the systemic like biases that exist within your organizations into the solutions that you're creating, so that we're not developing tools that get used by companies in some way to like basically continue the biased systems that we're existing in, right? So like the awareness and the conversations happening sooner, I think can be a really positive thing.
All right, equity. Oh. Lisa G, why buzzword?
Because initially that was not a discussion. Everyone was just talking about diversity and inclusion, and it's just now they're throwing in equity. So I think that it's just a buzzword that they're throwing around, and no one really is doing the work per se on the equity. Not to say no one. I'm speaking as far as like for me as an employee of a company. I still don't know how much you make, Deena, if you're my peer. I don't know how much you make to you really know if the equity across the company is really being taken into consideration. I don't know how much my peers make. So I really don't know if equity is really being implemented across the board or not.
And Lisa M, you said movement.
Well, so I think my logic behind equity is the fact that I think the reason people are starting to lean on equity and adding additional words to the like D&I is because what they were getting when they were pushing for diversity and what they were getting when they were pushing for inclusion wasn't enough. And I think that it is of movement right now to say, like, it's not enough for you to just increase representation numbers. What we're looking for is actual structural, like, dismantling of systems so that we can actually have equal access that takes into account our, unique interests, needs, and barriers. And so like, it's like this complex thing that we're just, I think, finally addressing the fact that in order for us to all actually have equity, there's a lot more that has to happen in the world. So movement, because I think it's opening the conversation up to being a bigger change that is inevitably needing to occur.
Okay. And then we are at our last and final word, the whole reason we're here, diversity and inclusion.
Oh, wow.
That is hilarious. Both of you are movement and buzzwords. So there you have it, everyone. Our conclusion is that diversity and inclusion is a movement, but it also still is a buzzword. And that concludes our talk for today. Lisa G and Lisa M, any final or parting words?
I just would like to say that, this work is everyone's work, no matter your role, no matter what type of company, no matter what level within an organization, you can be a part of creating a more inclusive space, and that it's all about behavior change. And I would encourage you to just think of, every single day, one thing that you can do to make one person in the world feel a little more included. And I think that that has a ripple effect across what's actually possible.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, I think that, diversity and inclusion is something where everyone's trying to figure out. Have patience, have grace. Everyone can't be the Ben and Jerry's because I think they're doing an amazing job. But, every company can't be them, but use them as a great example. Because I really think they're killing it with the diversity and inclusion efforts.
Amazing. Thank you, ladies, for your time today. I appreciate it. And I know that everyone is going to appreciate the conversation that we had about diversity and inclusion today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
As you can see from today's conversation, my panelists and I said that diversity and inclusion is both a movement and a buzzword. I would love to hear what you think about diversity and inclusion. So feel free to use the hashtag BTU at SXSW or the chat functionality to let us know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed today's conversation and want to hear more conversations like this, make sure to listen and subscribe to my podcast, Black Tech Unplugged, which is available on all podcast platforms, or connect with myself or the other panelists on social media. Until next time.